Detroit Become Human? Can you really call it a game? No and yes, because it's not a game in the traditional sense, but you have games like Paper Please and Job Simulator that kind of question the boundary of what a video game is. Large parts of the game lean on interactive cutscenes in which these cutscenes can have drastic ramifications on the story. So in a sense, gameplay is the choices you make. You're also trying to weigh the consequences of your actions so you can get the best ending. The biggest problem I have with these damn cinematic games is that they rely on realism to the detriment of the gameplay. For instance, I don't like slow walking places. I get in my car to avoid that tedium, so what the hell makes you think I want to slow walk in a video game? I especially hate when I have to slow walk with the AI. I don't care for it. Take it out of the game. Maybe that's unrealistic of me, expecting slow walking to be taken out of cinematic video games. It's like peanut butter to the jelly. However, some of the problems that I have with this game, which I will be exploring more in the video, is that cinematics sometimes get in the way of player agency. It feels like the story comes first before whatever you want to do. It's like you're an actor playing a role, and if you try to act outside of that role, the game slaps you on the hand for it. If it's not the invisible walls, it's the game forcing you to make choices before you've had the time to explore the area. Yet when I compare Detroit Become Human to other David Cage projects, if you don't know who he is, David Cage is the writer and director for Quantic Dream games, such as Indigo Prophecy, Heavy Rain, and Beyond Two Souls. And I have to say that this new project doesn't necessarily live up to Heavy Rain, but I'm not trying to compare the difference between Quantic Dream games. What I'm trying to get at is that Heavy Rain had more of a sense of urgency than Become Human, and that large portions in this game are filled with fluff. There's also an element of social commentary that can be easily missed if you're not trying to think about it. Detroit Become Human focuses on the story of three androids. You have Connor, tasked by CyberLife to investigate the spread of deviance in Android. You're partnered with Hank, the burnt-out cop who hates androids for past tragedy. You have Marcus, for which the game lazily tries to build this relationship with Carl, a famous artist with a drug-addicted son. And finally, you have Kara, an android previously destroyed by the abusive father. Kara's story deals with the relationship with the child and also themes with the importance of family and creating strong bonds. Connor's story deals with the theme of self-discovering and finding out who he is and what his true purpose is. Marcus is about becoming a leader and dealing with the conflict of pursuing peace or war for the freedom of his people. Depending on your choices or inactions, these can affect the story's outcome. Now, for my first playthrough, I focused on getting the worst ending. That meant I spent majority of the game refusing to interact with the button prompts. By doing that, you definitely won't like the choices the game picks for you, particularly with Marcus's story. If you're going for the bad ending with him, excluding getting him killed, it actually becomes a tragic story of a failed leader. Now, I'm not trying to spoil the story too much, but honestly, the game is built around cutscenes. Chances are you're going to see something that might spoil your playthrough. Keep in mind, I'll probably be focusing on the worst choices I've made in the story, but watch at your own discretion. Even though I had got the worst ending with Marcus, I was still engaged with his story towards the later half of the game, and I actually felt bad for choosing the worst options. For instance, Marcus goes on various raids throughout the story. He raids the CyberLife facility, a news station, a CyberLife store, and finally does a public protest. Each one of those times I failed miserably, either from getting androids killed by indecision or just making the situation worse. It finally got to the point where North, one of your androids second in command, assumed control over the rebellion. Right after that, Marcus leaves and the FBI finds the android's hideout and begins to kill all of them. At that point, the game gives me one last chance to redeem myself and become a hero. Instead, I chose to have Marcus walk away, which leads me to interpret that Marcus believed himself to be the worst kind of leader/hero that could no longer save his people, and the best thing he could do was walk away. After that, you don't see Marcus for the remainder of the story, and North takes over as the new leader. It's actually funny because the game doesn't know what to do with you. After the credits, you see Marcus one last time staring off in the distance with a sad expression on his face. Now, Connor's story, I didn't mean to mess it up. Out of Kara and Marcus's story, I found Connor's to be the most engaging. Connor had the most action by far and had little to no downtime. I always felt like I was progressing his story with every action. The relationship building with Hank compelled me to get the best possible outcomes. Hank as a character is very likable and down to earth, and I don't really know why I like him, but I know I want him to like me. There's a moment in particular that I have to reference. After coming back from the eating club, basically where the sex robots live, which, surprise, surprise, detective story involving sex workers, you have a heart-to-heart moment with Hank. And this comes from making a decision earlier on whether or not you decided to kill or spare another android.
Having existential doubts, Connor? Sure you're not going deviant too? I self-test regularly. I know what I am and what I am not. Where are you going?
Get drunker. I need to think.
In that moment, you can see Hank is beginning to question his own ideology on androids. It's the subtlety of it and it's the nuance of the writing that really hooks me in. At that moment, you can see the turning point. I think you can really only appreciate the subtlety of this moment when you do another playthrough. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but the more times Connor dies, the more robotic and colder he is. During my second playthrough, there was a part where I was trying to be sincere, but instead I came off as sounding more robotic.
Something's changed in you, Connor. Each time you died, you'd come back just a little colder. You showed less and less empathy.
I never felt empathy, Lieutenant. I don't know what you saw in me, but you were mistaken.
Basically, if you prioritize the investigation over your own safety or the safety of others, Connor can no longer choose the good ending for himself. Every time he dies, he loses the ability to become a deviant. I do want to note the performance of Brian Deckhart as Connor. He did an amazing job with his mocap performance and voice acting because Connor, he is somewhat a weird fellow.
It's a few blocks away. We should go have a look.
Connor, the fuck are you doing? Whoa, hey! Oh, Connor, you're so disgusting. I think I'm gonna puke again.
All jokes aside, I enjoyed the performance. One thing that really bothered me though, if Connor's the most advanced cyberlife android, then why does he get his ass whooped by every other android? I could understand if he was fighting Luther, android built to carry heavy loads, but sex androids? Okay. Or random service android? Like, I thought maybe cyberlife would equip him with some type of kick-ass martial arts moves. I guess it's just convenient for the plot that this happens. Now we get to Kara's story. I already know this is going to make me sound like a dick, but I tried to get Kara and the kid killed. First playthrough, I let the dad beat up Kara, causing Alice to shoot the father, only then to have her eat shotgun shells to the face later on in the story. The second playthrough, I didn't do anything, which ended in the kid dying. That was a terrible ending, and I had to reload that save, which Chloe made me feel instantly guilty. I'm trying to focus on the positives before I get into talking about the negatives, but nothing in Kara's story stood out to me. It has a good opening with the abusive father, and the game even hints at him having a mental illness. The major problem I have with her story is the little girl Alice. She makes little to no commentary on what's happening besides making you feel bad for stealing. Through the entirety of this game, you learn nothing about her character. She essentially acts as a prop for the player to feel empathy for something in the world. Most of Kara's gameplay or lack of it boils down to walking around and looking for interactives. And I can see right through their appeals to pull at my emotional heartstrings. You don't build a relationship with this little girl besides from taking care of her. It's a huge letdown after seeing Hank and Connor's relationship. You get to learn about Hank's likes and dislikes, his personality. With Hank, it's very easy to upset that fragile balance. But with Alice, you have to go out of your way to make that little girl not like you. I'm trying not to spoil major plot points here, but you're going to want to skip ahead. There's a part in the game where you find out Alice is an android. That for me right there ruins the whole reason for Kara to be in the story, because now we lose the question of whether or not humans and androids could build a relationship. What does it mean for Alice to be a human raised by an android? Would the android accept Alice? Would Alice one day become the spokesperson for android and human relations? It's been taken off the table. You have narratively destroyed my interest in Kara and Alice's relationship to a higher degree, and in a lot of ways distracts from the story, because now you can take Alice and Kara out of the game and it would not have an effect on the story. To be even more honest, neither Kara nor Marcus stood out as characters in the story. I don't know. You think them being deviants, they would express more emotions. It would appear to me that Marcus is about to fall asleep and Kara seems confused as to where she's at. I mean, they're both just boring characters. And I think that most people would honestly choose Connor, and I think people feel more engaged in his story, even though through half of it he comes off as more robotic than the other two. Marcus's story doesn't really start to take off until the second act, and Kara has a meandering story at that. I'm going to talk about a few inconsistencies in the world, along with other plot details. For starters, let's talk about this RA9 phenomenon. Based on the scattered information you get in the game, You can guess that RA9 is thought of as a messiah. It's one of the more intricate plot points in Connor's story, but it offers nothing in terms of narrative. You already experienced the androids having a fear of death and having human emotions, so why do we need this mystical element? It adds nothing to the story as a whole. You could take that out of the game and it would have no effect. Originally, I had the assumption that RA9 was Marcus because he seems to be the only one that can awaken other androids. However, the president isn't there because there were other androids or deviant androids before Marcus. I'm just trying to understand why Marcus is the only android with those powers. North and Josh, who are supposed to be his advisor or resistance generals, never demonstrate that ability. Why can he just plan an android and all of a sudden they're awoken? Another inconsistency I have is with the world. I know they wanted to focus on the narrative. However, leaving behind some of the sci-fi elements leaves me with some questions I can't easily reconcile. Let me know if this makes any sense. I lost my job to androids and live in a low-income household. Why then would I purchase an almost $10,000 android to do cleaning and housework for me? That's an exuberant expense. Only the rich and the wealthy would actually purchase androids. Maybe people in the lower income would probably rent androids. And I don't even want to talk about how the androids never sleep or eat. What? Do they have an infinite renewable energy source? If so, we solved the energy crisis. When I take the time to sit and think about it, it just doesn't make the world seem very believable. There is an element of social commentary present, yet I don't feel as though it's going to start a discussion or get anyone to think about these topics differently. What is presented only seems as a background element to enhance the drama of the narrative. Thus, it does not stand on its own, and when taken out of the context of the game, it falls apart. All in all, for what we get in the story, which at times can be very cliche, taking for instance the buddy cop drama with Connor and Hank. One's a renegade with a tragic past and the other's a stiff, trying to follow all the rules. Oh, how the comedy ensues. The contrived drama.
Fucking whore walked out on me for a fucking accountant!
And a few bad lines of dialogue.
Their smell of sweat. And their dirty words.
There are quite a few technical limitations in the story that stop it from being amazing. If I could, I think that the story would benefit from just having Connor. You could cut out the other two characters. A more focused story on Connor could alleviate some of the boredom in this title. Or another idea, keep Connor and Marcus. Instead, focus on the conflict between the two characters. The game already kinda does this towards the end, but if the two characters had crossed paths earlier in the game, I think you could build better suspense. You as the character would have to decide between Marcus and Connor's mission. And because we took Kara out of the story, we could focus more on Marcus, giving him that much needed personality. The question that Quantic Dream and other developers in this genre have to ask is freedom. How do you navigate allowing player choice in a narrative? If too restrictive, then you have Order 1886 or Beyond Two Souls. Too open, and you get Mass Effect 3's ending, where the developer didn't have the resources or time to show all the different variation. In this genre of point-and-click cinematic experience, or for that matter games with a focus on narrative, such as Naughty Dog's Uncharted series or the recent God of War from Santa Monica, I firmly believe that there's always a conflict between the narrative and gameplay. And in this situation of Detroit Become Human, it struggles the most in that department. The major problem I can't seem to shake here is the repetitive gameplay loop of having your characters walk around, touching and rotating various objects. It becomes very stale, very fast. There's this meandering gameplay of walking around till you find the next interactive. This uninspired way of interacting with the world leads to pacing issues, particularly in the case of this game. Having to deal with some of the high action choices in Connor's storyline only to switch over to Kara where you do something mundane as having to look for shelter. There's just this large part of empty space in Marcus's and Kara's gameplay, and this only leads to me to feeling more detached from their story. I feel completely useless to the experience that I should be taking part in, as if my role as the player is only to admire the spectacle of it all and say, whoa, so pretty, what does it all mean? Another thing about this game is the dialogue. I can't tell you how many times I responded, well, I didn't know he'd do that. How am I supposed to understand what my character is going to say based off of one word of text? In the context of the dialogue, what does determined, rational, or cold mean? In one instance, Marcus was about to give a declaration to the humans, and you could either choose a peaceful or a determined way of communicating this. I chose determined, not knowing that that would make me sound violent. I could have sworn in this thing called English, determined wouldn't be a synonym for violent. Also, I'm just going to add this to the list of my complaints. I don't like motion controls. Actually, I hate motion controls. I don't like having to flail my arms around like an idiot. You know, the best games that have motion controls are the ones where you can turn them off. For what Detroit Become Human tries to accomplish as a cinematic gameplay experience, it falls short. However, I can't necessarily say this game is complete garbage or a complete waste of time. Honestly, I question where cinematic games are going to go in the future. From where I'm looking at, it's already becoming stale and unoriginal to me. Maybe in the future they'll do procedurally generated storylines. The technology will be able to adapt to your story choices. Honestly, the best place to make, you know, these type of cinematic games are with detective stories. They just seem to blend very well because you're searching for something or there's a reason for you to be walking around and interacting with the certain objects and things of that nature. You know, there's a few good elements here and there which made my experience more enjoyable. I mean, this is the perfect game to introduce to people who don't play video games. It's also a fun game to have a few people over with. All in all, I'm interested to see what Quantic Dream will do next, and I think they were kind of hinting at a sequel, so I'm not 100% sure on that, but I felt like they left a lot of room open for a continuation of the story. It might not have a great track record, but at least they take chances more so than other developers. It tries to be more than what it is, and I can't hate them for that. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Chloe.
Oops, I think your saved game is corrupted. Just kidding.
She's an android that appears before starting the game. She's like a hostess or whatever for the start menu, and she makes a little few interesting notes here and there about some of the choices you've made in the game. And you know, in my first playthrough, which was the one I did the worst on, she actually became a deviant and left my starting screen. So that was something that was actually pretty interesting. There was another part where, you know, she asked you to do a survey, and that was pretty interesting, like a little social experiment to kind of throw in the game. You know, I kind of like that interactive start menu thing, or just being able to look at her face at the beginning as you're kind of turning the game on is pretty interesting. But other than that, for what Detroit Become Human is, I'm trying to explain yours, I necessarily can't say that it's lived up to Heavy Rain or is anything better than any other cinematic game that's out there. I mean, it has a lot of polish. It looks good. The animation looks amazing, and for what it is, the voice acting is good too. Mocap is good. It feels as though the story falls apart, and it's just difficult to reconcile that. So I'd say check it out if you're definitely into cinematic video games. If you played all of the cinematic games and you want to add this to your collection, I'd say definitely it's a definite buy. But if you're trying to save your money for the, you know, fourth quarter, I would say you could pass on it. Wait till it's on the sale. So anyway, I'm gonna go drink some punch or something.